promote. And I think there's an unbelievable hunger for it, because one of the things I've noticed, and I have discussed this publicly a lot, I pay a lot of attention to my audiences. And everywhere I go in the world, if I make a case for the nexus, let's say, between suffering, which is inevitable, and the meaning that emerges out of the voluntary adoption of responsibility, everyone falls silent. And that happens all the time. And my sense of that is, and this is part of the reason why I think there's a conservative opportunity that's beckoning in a major way that you might be tapping into, is that what conservatives have to offer young people, and that's the first time I've ever seen this really be the case, is the meaningful existence that characterizes, it's so absurd that it has to be said, that characterizes genuine maturation and sacrifice on behalf of others. Like as a real viable pathway forward existentially and psychologically to have the kind of life that enables you to not be bitter in the face of catastrophe. And so now it's a paradoxical thing, right? Because apparently what you're offering on the libertarian side is something like freedom from authoritarian constraint. That's an odd thing in some sense for a conservative to be offering. But do you see, why is it that what you're selling, so to speak, what you're promoting, is resonating deeply among younger people in Quebec? And how do you conceptualize that from the perspective of the development, let's say, of a political vision, which is something that conservatives tend to struggle to do?
We have to understand that historically, because we were stuck in the old debate and the old constitutional fights and feuds, almost all the political parties in Quebec were more center-left. They were all social democrats, and they were all in favor of the nanny state, and that's why in Quebec we had, a bigger state. The state intervention was much stronger than elsewhere, and even at the federal level, we used to vote more liberal, it's always been, there was kind of a consensus on that side. And now that debate is over, there's a new one that is emerging, and of course, the fact that it's new and the fact that it's fresh and the fact that it's different is attracting already a younger crowd, because you're not scaring them off. They love change, but there's also the fact that I do believe that they're, because of the social media, because of the new world that we're in, they're much more open towards the world, if I could say so. And that's something, they want to be part of something also larger. And for that, you need a little bit more freedom, and you don't want to be just limited to Quebec. And with the state intervention, everything is limited to Quebec. Everything is, so there's a vision of looking outside of the box. I think that helps out a lot. The fact also, and I'm back to what happened over the last 2 years, who suffered the most during those days, You and I probably, a curfew at 8 or 9 p.m., it's not the end of the world, but if I were 20, if I recall what I was doing after 9 p.m. when I was 20, the impact was much larger on me. And I think they took, much more than seniors, they realized how the state could, ruin your life at a certain extent when they're pushing the envelope a little bit too far. And so that woke up a lot of people who were completely apolitical. It's not necessarily people coming from other parties that are joining us. It's people who used to not even vote, and now they're card-carrying members and they're volunteers on our campaigns or even running for us. So there's something very, very different. The paradigm also has shifted on that side, and it's for many of us, we realize that politics could intervene a lot in our life, and that's why we're standing up to say, look, stay out of it, there's limits. And that's why even the slogan of our campaign is Libre chez nous. We didn't know it, you can't translate that perfectly in English, but if we translate it word to word, it's free at home. So it's, and what it says is that, there's limits. I want to have the control. You were talking about your family, your unit. So even our slogan refers to that. Like the state cannot cross my entrance door without my will. We want to go back to be empowered of what we're doing within our own houses. And that for a new generation is probably something that is is more interesting, and even worldwide right now we see that our parents were more collectivist in many ways, like just when you were talking about the separatist movement at the base was a collective movement. It was as francophones, as old French Canadians. It had something very collective. And nowadays, because of social media, we're a little bit more individualistic, I think, at many extent. And yes, we are francophone, yes, we are Quebecers, but we're also part of all sorts of groups and all sorts of friends all over the world, and we unite based on different issues than just our language or our geographic limitations. So it also has an impact on your political reality when it's time to vote. So
well, you can imagine that. Okay, so Quebec was united in some sense on the French side under the Catholic Church, and then that fragmented, and then Quebec attempted to unite under the auspices of a collective nationalism, and then one of the consequences was that people were turning to a powerful and unified state as a vehicle for their dreams. And that meant that the state as it became the vehicle for those dreams, it also became more intrusive in the ways that would be associated with excess, let's say, pretensions of benevolence. And then you're making the case that the limitations of that approach became radically evident to young people when the state overplayed its hand in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic and locked them down way too hard. And that woke up a generation of young people to the dangers of the overweening state, even if that was allied with some desirable expression of nationalism and group identity. Does that seem about right?
Yeah, that's about how I feel it. Like that's what we saw over the last few months, the last few years here in Quebec. It happened elsewhere as well. We're not unique in the world where it did happen, but I think here it hit a little bit faster and stronger. So the difference, and that's why Quebec society is an interesting case because of that, because as I said, we usually react quickly and more homogeneously than elsewhere, and so from a sociological perspective, that's what you can observe right now.
So on the policy side, there's a principle that governs conservative thinking that's actually derived from the Catholic Church, and then even more deeply derived from an older biblical tradition based on the Old Testament Exodus story, that proper governance, proper distribution of responsibility should follow the principle of subsidiarity. And so the notion is, and Edmund Burke developed this as well, it's a very good notion, and I think it's correct. It's one of the things that attracts me in some fundamental sense to conservative thinking, which is that, well, you can imagine a state where there's a single executive who has all the power and the people have none, and then you'd think of that as a tyranny, and that